My name is Alla Marchenko, and I'm the president of the Aurora Philosophy Institute. This evening, we welcome API associate Torrey Byles as our speaker. Torrey is well-known to most of us and is an active member of our philosophy group. He is the principal economist of Granada Research in California and has an academic background in both philosophy and economics. In particular, he has studied with the famous philosopher John Searle at Berkeley. Searle's work on social ontology, using the specific example of the philosophy of money, has been very influential in addressing the question, is money real? And philosophically speaking, what is real? Over to you, Torrey.
Okay, thanks, Alla, and welcome to everybody. I'm very pleased to speak to this group because it spans both economists and philosophers, professionals, as well as the rest of us, laymen, philosophers and economists. I think once you reach a certain age, everybody is automatically a philosopher and an economist. You have to deal with the world. Let me give you my background. After I got a BA in economics from the University of California, San Diego, I spent the first 20 years in my 20s, the first decade after that, living in Taiwan, where I learned Mandarin Chinese, and I was working as a journalist covering computers and electronics and mini dragons of the Far East. This was in the 1980s. Later, I came back to the United States and became an analyst in Silicon Valley, looking at supply chain automation, cybernetic connections between companies up and down supply chains for just-in-time inventory, and the economics around that. I used input-output economic analysis quite extensively in that to identify marketplaces and inter-industry trade flows. And then after Silicon Valley, I moved to Oregon and concentrated more on regional economic development, in particular, strategy of development that relied on organic development of locally owned businesses as the means for the development of regions, as opposed to inviting large corporations to come and locate as a means for development. So I'm very much an anti-globalist economist. Let's just put it that way. So what I think one of the key things in my background, though, is, and then I got a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies, which spanned economics and environmental studies, both. But I would also make a plug here that my talk is going to be very interdisciplinary across not only philosophy and economics, but multiple sciences, if you will. And I think one of the key points that I strongly advocate is getting out of the silos of particular disciplines to be able to look at broader pictures in the evolution of science and in scientific revolutions. So I'm going to talk about today ontology of money and the paradigm shifts in philosophy and economics. And after submitting my sort of overview essay to John a couple of weeks ago on this topic, we decided that it really takes two presentations to do this. So today I'm going to do half of my presentation, but let me get this going here. How come my screen is not? Yeah, okay. Today I'm going to give an introduction on the relation between economics and philosophy over the last 250 years and what happened in those years. I'm going to look at the ontology of money in brief, and then I'm going to look at the problems that economic science has had dealing with conceptualizing money in their theories. So my basic thesis here will be what happened, both the developments in philosophy over the last 250 years actually have gone through a paradigm shift that will help economics out of its current confusions and around money. The specific developments in philosophy that occurred in those years are what have been now known as the philosophy of language, and those in the sciences of the human, principally psychology, the human sciences, principally psychology, sociology, and economics. What I'm going to propose is that economics needs to adopt these modern developments in philosophy to re-envision itself as a science of collective semiosis and self-interpretation. In other words, our economy is all in how we jointly create meaningfulness and coordinated action in our material living arrangements. Now, what happened was at the moment of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, this was the high point of the Enlightenment and sort of the climax of the scientific revolution of the 200 years previous to that. And there was this kind of classic version of science that came about. And so economics at the time of its birth as a science adopted this classic version of science for its methodology and mode of investigation into economic phenomena. But that mode, with its strict separation of object, subject, and subject, while it was effective in the natural and physical science, was not appropriate for economic and the human sciences. Philosophy gave the sciences a methodology that just didn't work for economics. But now economics, in its 250 years, with its incredible growth and industrialization and the application of science to technological development, seemed to validate that science was the right approach and had the right, it was certainly the right foundations for our culture. Science was working and giving us a better material life. But that dualistic, nominalistic, positivistic, empirical approach to science, that was the classic view of science, just couldn't adequately make for a theory of money. And the separation of knower and known, subject and object, could not produce a coherent theory of money. The single most important thing at the heart of economics, money, just defies the empirical nominalist approach. It cannot resolve the antinomies and paradoxes of money and cannot produce a coherent theory of money. Thus, the fruitful method of science in the natural sciences is not applicable to the social sciences of economics. And without an adequate understanding of money, there's no possibility for an adequate theory of economy, because as Schumpeter says here, any satisfactory theory of money implies a theory of the economic process in its entirety. So let's talk about the ontology of money. So ontology is about how things exist, a thing's nature, how it can be an object of attention, what its constituent components are. Ontology can be of abstract concepts, but also of physical things. And so that's where things get a little tricky with the ontology of money. So what is the ontology of money? Money is a sign that allows people to take action. While we can use money as a metric of valuation to represent things and services that people buy, the real essence of money is that it allows people to take action. The representational aspect is for settling, which means making the two parties' agreement of a property or service transfer complete and having no further obligation between them. The representational aspect is only one action in a composite series of actions that money enables. So money enables hiring people, acquiring property, paying off debts, and so forth. The physical ontology of money, how it exists in token form, is not a primary aspect of money's ontology. Money's primary ontology is conceptual, it is abstract, it is mental or semiotic. Each currency unit is a unit of credit recognized by members of a community to settle debts owed to one another. Searle calls it, the economist John Searle calls it a standing possibility of action. From a mainstream science standpoint, the ontology of money is a hard thing to grasp. It's usually ontology is about thingness or objectness. For example, the rocks and trees have an obvious ontology, but with money, there is no physical thing. Money does not exist independently of the human observer, like rocks and trees do. Money, that is observer dependent. It's money, it only exists in the mind of the observer. It is ontologically subjective. But because the community believes it to be money, it is epistemologically objective. So part of the definition of money is that other people believe that it's money. But if the content of the belief is that other people believe it, then to explain that belief means you have to repeat that same feature over and over. There's an infinite regress or a vicious circle in defining what money is. Children don't see money like they do rocks and trees. You have to learn to see money. Only adults see money. Adults have learned to see money. Searle describes this odd phenomena that something can exist only because people believe it to exist, as money is epistemologically objective, but ontologically subjective, as the chart shows. This pithy phrase has 4 distinctions: object, subject, ontology, and epistemology. Epistemically, objective and subjective are primarily predicates to judgments, or the descriptions of a judgment, which can be either factual, which is independent of the subject, or attitudes and opinions, which are subjective or of the subject. Ontologically, objective and subjective are predicates to entities and how they exist. We can talk about abstract concepts, but how do they exist? The focus is not so much on the words we use or how abstract concepts exist. So it produces a confusion. But things such as itches or bodily pains or a stomachache, these are subjective entities because their mode of existence depends upon being felt by a subject. So as a result of these 4 distinctions, epistemic and ontological, objectivity and subjectivity, there are 3 general kinds of, you can call, knowingness of the world. And here we see in this chart. So on the far left side is sort of the full objective factual reality, was epistemologically objective reality. And up to this point here, epistemological and ontological are both objective. On the far right, you see purely subjective personal and private awareness by an individual subject. These include opinions and personal preferences and judgments. And over on this side, you could say there's both ontological subjectivity and epistemological subjectivity. But generally, you don't say epistemological objective, because epistemology is about a point of view, and ontology doesn't have a point of view. It just is. It's just the thing that is. So it doesn't really apply to put epistemological subjectivity over here, because again, epistemology is about a point of view. So in the in-between, the overlap between these 2 general both categories, you could say, and then this isn't really mutually exclusive categories. These are focuses of perception. So money in all economic institutions, such as corporations, governments, private property, etc., are similar to itches and stomach aches in that they are ontologically subjective, where they only exist in people's minds. But because everyone shares these beliefs about the institutions, they become epistemologically objective and real. They are independent of any single observer. They really do exist. So as Searle says, epistemic objectivity does not require ontological objectivity. And this fact, says Searle, is the basis for the social sciences. And so one point more to add here, and we see these words down here. These are sort of the objective, subjective, and then what's called intersubjective. And that an individual's cognition is socially conditioned was the beginning point in the Enlightenment that recognized how language influenced people's perception. And this was started by philosophers such as Humboldt and Herder and Hamann. But the actual name intersubjectivity was given the name by a German philosopher in the early 19-teens, Husserl. And there are many names for intersubjectivity here. So social ontology, consensus reality, background understanding, average mutual intelligibility, discursive formations, anonymous meanings are some of them. Even in the economics profession, 20th century economists have come close to it in their notions of bounded rationality, rational expectations, and even macro foundations for individual behavior. The institutionalists, in particular, Veblen to Bordeaux, are the best when they say, not only do we make institutions, but institutions make us. So the way money works, specifically here, is that money is spoken into existence by banks. Loans create deposits. Loans create the money supply. Then in the marketplace and during transactions, prices are made between people trucking and bartering to become determinate facts in conversation. So once these generally two speech actions take place, loaning money into existence and then users of money speaking prices and wages into determinate facts, specific prices and wages, that is. Once those are done, people act as if this money and these quantities of money, is in terms of prices and wages, are objectively, epistemologically objective, real. They act as if these are real. This is the reality. The factual existence of money and prices creates reasons for people to act. So for example, if I go into a restaurant and I order food, it's brought to me, the waiter, after I finish it, brings me a slip of paper with numbers on it. I get out some kind of money token, whether bills or credit card. I write off some amount. Now we've settled the exchange. I didn't want to really spend my money, but I understood what the process here, what the action, the practice of doing so involved. And so I did what I did. Same thing if I'm walking down the street and I get to an intersection and I want to make a right-hand turn, I see this corner lot has a lawn on it, and I'm tempted to just walk diagonally across the lawn to go make that my right-hand turn, but I know that I'm walking on somebody's private property, so I don't do that. I stay off the property. So what I'm saying is the meaningfulness of money, the meaningfulness of private property are the causes of my action, or the causes of my behavior. And so it's only the meaningfulness of money and property and the other institutions as sets of rights and obligations that cause my behavior. They give us reasons for action. And this is a formal, final causation. This is not efficient, material, or mechanical causation. Money's power should not be construed as a natural material force or some kind of psychic force or instinct or compulsion or even psychological trait, such as honesty or sincerity. The power of language goes beyond language and impacts the real world, the physical and social worlds alike. It's the meaningfulness of the money sign that causes humans' action and the material effects of their action. This is an this is what's called performativity. Money is an engine, not a camera, as one recent economist put it. This is performativity. And so that's sort of the ontology of money in a nutshell. Okay, so now this ontology of money was, of course, way off the radar of the economists back in Adam Smith's day, the classical economists. Money had been around for thousands of years in Eastern and Western cultures and in Northern and Southern cultures as well, Africa, Pacific Islands, South and Central America. Aristotle, 250 years before Christ, recognized that money was a human-made creation and instituted in law. He also claimed that money was outside of genuine economy. Genuine economy, according to Aristotle, was about household self-sufficiency in the production of food and materials for living. We would call this autarky. And contrary to the self-contained notion of economy or household management, money, according to Aristotle, came into existence for obtaining goods and supplies from distant places that the household could not produce on its own. But if you resorted to trade with distant parties, you had to first accumulate money with which you could pay them. So thus, you had to produce more than your needs in your household in order to get the money to trade with foreign traders. Aristotle held that the true economy was about production for one's own use, whereas using money to obtain goods and services from the outside of the household in the public space involved production for gain or production for profit. This distinction between production for own use and production for gain was, according to Karl Polanyi in The Great Transformation in 1944, the most important distinction ever made in the social sciences. Also, Aristotle held that money and markets, the public space outside of the household, were one and the same phenomenon. They were ontologically inseparable. It really was the money market mechanism. Now, for thousands of years, the money market mechanism played very small roles in societies that had money. Genuine economy, in the Aristotelian definition, was the norm, household production for its own use. It wasn't until the 13th to 15th centuries in Northern Italy, with the invention of banking and paper money and public finance, that money and markets started proliferating and becoming a central feature of social organization. The specialization of productive activities and the vast reach that money allowed linked different regions and societies in the world into trading networks that gave considerable rise in material wealth. By the time of Adam Smith and the physiocrats, the money market mechanism was very conspicuously changing the world, but they did not really understand why that was happening. Instead, they took the interdependence for granted and instead studied only the mechanics of, as Schumpeter would put it later, the interdependency of economic phenomena and whether analysis of that interdependence will yield relations sufficient to determine, if possible, uniquely all the prices and quantities of products and productive services that constitute the economic system. This was Schumpeter's way of saying how the economists of the 18th century discovered economics as a self-contained discipline of science. They discovered this interdependency of economic phenomena. But they didn't understand money. And so David Ricardo recognized that money's value was not constant. Other economists at the time tried to characterize factors of production as if, like land, labor, and capital, or money, as if these would be some kind of natural force. But in fact, they were not natural forces. They were just ways of making money. Landlords rent to people. Capitalists spend on equipment and hire labor to produce a product to sell. And laborers sell their labor in the market. So there's factors of production are really just ways of making money. Jean-Baptiste Say conflated money with natural forces of supply and demand in his theory, where supply creates its own demand. And then after 90 years, after Smith's Wealth of Nations, Leon Walras Walras' mathematical conception of general economic equilibrium provided the first comprehensive solution of the interdependence problem. Schumpeter called it the Magna Carta of economics. But this was not to be. Walras' achievement, while elegant, was faulty. It was a utopian vision, a vision of reality that existed nowhere and could never exist anywhere. It was pure fantasy. It held that money had to be a physical thing and a fixed, invariable, neutral standard of value, which it is absolutely not, no matter how many laws are instituted or wishful thoughts people perform. Empirically, ontologically, money is not neutral, it is not physical, it is not invariable. In fact, it was known for centuries that money's value was not fixed nor neutral. Hundreds of years before Adam Smith, merchants, statesmen, and other observers invented a name for inflation, charistia, they called it, and distinguished it as a phenomenon separate from a price increase due to a supply shortage. By the time of Adam Smith, people were quite aware of inflation. This chart here, for example, is inflation eras for the last 1,000 years, all on a base price level back to 1209. And it's really a cost of living index that the actual inflation rates are the changes in the cost of living index. And notice on the left-hand side, it's a logarithmic scale. So this increase in inflation, or this increase in the cost of living, is much greater sort of than it's shown in these waves of inflation. So David Hume, for example, had made the distinction between nominal versus real values of prices and wages. And it went on and on. Economists kept on believing that money was neutral, fixed in value, and had to be a physical thing. In order to save their physicalist theory, they had to invent all kinds of bizarre rubrics and qualifications. And finally, by the 1930s, they started the tactic of claiming that it wasn't the theory that was deficient, it was that people are irrational, ignorant, and susceptible to delusions. There was a veil of money, they would say. This was their fallback position to explain why their theories were useless in both prediction and policy formulation. So the discipline of economics never got its arms around the ontology of money. Keynes in the 1930s did put together a new paradigm of money that somewhat fit into the framework of interdependency. He built on the insights of an economist in Germany named Knapp and a British colonial administrator named Innes, and Keynes was also in intensive conversation with colleagues at Cambridge, UK. This was a circle that included two of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, Bertrand Russell, who was Keynes's graduate advisor, and Ludwig Wittgenstein, who came up from Vienna. It could be argued that Keynes was the breakthrough economic scientist because he was first and foremost a philosopher who completed his dissertation under Bertrand Russell and only anecdotally and informally learned economics through a friend of his father, Alfred Marshall. Keynes discovered and made a theory about what I'm calling performativity of money in his pithy phrase, the monetary production economy. And by this felicitous phrase, Keynes meant at least three things, whether he intended to or not. There's an anthropological sense. The whole community makes a money token. That's one sense of monetary production. The community makes a money token to do economic trading and production. Then there's a focus in that phrase of the socio-technology that money is, and how it changes the productivity of a community. A monetary production economy is much more productive than other kinds of economies that don't use money, like barter or command and control. So that's a sort of a socio-technological sense that money has some kind of mystical power, so to speak, or some kind of power to supercharge the productivity of a community. And then there's a third sense of the name monetary production economy. It's more of a psychological intentionality sense to the individual actor in an economy, a money economy, where in order to survive in a monetary economy, you have to make money. You know, you have to be monetarily productive. You make money. So this broad, multivalent, and even ambiguous phrase was also felicitous because it added a whole new dimension to the meaning of an economy. As a device for production, not merely trade and commerce, the scope and possibilities for understanding interdependent human activities coordinated by money were greatly expanded. So in other words, it wasn't just making, money wasn't just, the monetary production economy took, combined both, money was both a device for trade and commerce of existing things, but it also allowed for production of new things, making new things that never existed before, and transforming raw materials into things that previously never existed. So monetary productivity had started expanding both those realms of Aristotle, that you could create things that you didn't create on your own with money, as well as creating things on your own. So nonetheless, Keynes' insight and theory was a great leap forward for economics, but he didn't have all the details spelled out. In part, this was due to his lacking important philosophical, I would say metaphysical, distinctions regarding how the performativity of anything, including money, could be possible. He called it the marginal efficiency of capital in funnels of activity, which is pretty close to accurate, but it was so esoteric that it was easy to ignore, which is what happened. And plus, that phrase of Keynes, marginal efficiency of capital, came after, almost as if an appendix in a paper after the general theory book. So it was an ignored and not very well developed concept that he said. And he should have called it not the marginal efficiency of capital, but he should have been more specific. It said marginal efficiency of money. Because capital is obviously a overdetermined word as well. You have physical capital, you have financial capital, you have human capital, social capital, natural capital, all these different kinds of capital. So if he just focused on money and talked about the efficiency of money, and not efficiency in the common sense word in economics of efficiency, but in the old fourfold distinction of causation by Aristotle, it's the efficient cause of things that cause action to happen. That would have been what he needed to spell out. Anyway, as a result, the attainment of a realistic, objective, and plausible theory of the economy in which money was given a realistic treatment was not possible using the classic materialist approach to science. Mainstream theory was especially misguided in its belief that money was a physical, objective, and neutral thing. Modern economics couldn't get the ontology of money right because it was still married to the classical version of science as practiced in the physical and natural sciences. This classical version of science adhered to an absolute duality and separation of subject-object in the creation of knowledge. In this way, it couldn't handle those real things that exist only exist subjectively and intersubjectively. It could not handle those observer-dependent but factual realities. Economics blindly took up this strict metaphysical duality of traditional science, and as a result has been in a state of chaos and confusion ever since. So the outcomes of demand and supply in any particular situation are not objective outcomes or processes governed by nature or God. They are outcomes of how people have made the money system work. There is no invisible hand of God. There's no self-regulating market equilibrium. There's no national government. There is only a governmental apparatus run by banks and corporations. Today, at the beginning of the 21st century, we face two immense challenges, which the current state of economic theory, with its naturalistic and invisible hand dogma of the money market mechanism, is unable to deal with. One is this massive inequality due to financialization. Here we see this famous chart that ever since the 1980s, there's been a tremendous disconnect between total output of economies and the average hourly compensation to labor. Much more money is being made in these capital unearned categories of profit, interest, capital gains, royalties than is being earned in average wages. The other problem is this vast, unstoppable destruction of the planetary biosphere as a result of industrialization, and in particular, the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. Here, money contracted equilibria, so-called, destabilizes the natural ecological homeostasis. So today, not only do we have an extreme economic crisis of inequality and ecological destruction, but we also have a crisis in economic science, a poor theoretical understanding of our predicament. According to the doctrines of mainstream economic theory, there are no solutions to these problems. There is not even a hint of a solution. It is the metaphysical paradigm shift that has taken place in philosophy, I say, that will save economics. And in there's three aphorisms I can leave you with before I make a quick summary of what I said, but three aphorisms about the metaphysical shift. The shift will be where we go from where people believe, as Descartes did, I think, therefore I am, to one where, as Martin Heidegger later corrected Descartes to say, people realize, I am, therefore I think. So I think, therefore I am switches to I am, therefore I think. You exist first, and then there's thinking that comes along. Included is another aphorism or a statement by Charles Sanders Peirce, the American pragmatist philosopher, who said, there's no thinking or cognition that produces anything but inferences, and inferences are never certain. Therefore, knowledge and truth require faith, as Kant, Immanuel Kant, unwittingly demonstrated. And finally, a third aphorism is, as Heraclitus 250 years before Aristotle put it, you could not discover the limits of soul, even if you traveled every road to do so. Such is the depth of its form. So let me just, in 2 slides, and I don't really like putting slides of lots of text here, but I'm just going to summarize what I just said. And basically is, there's 8 points. The method of natural science, with its strict absolute duality between subject and object, is inappropriate for economics. It cannot deal with observer-dependent intersubjectivity ontologies, which are rife in economics. Economic institutions, money, property, corporations, government agencies, even private citizen subjects are shorthand symbols, signs that people mutually understand and use to coordinate their action and establish recurrent orders of activity. These signs, like all language, are learned by the individual from speaking with other members of the community and culture. They inform the individual's intentionality, subjectivity, and action. The individual subjectivity is part of a community-spoken intersubjectivity or objective mind. There is no objective behavior of an individual subject. The behavior is an expression of the community's rationality as best interpreted by the individual. Each individual is a self-interpreting being using common meanings of the speaking community, including institutional symbols and signs. To develop knowledge of the economic semiotic order, both as a participant as well as an investigating scientist, aka professional economist, one must already understand and act according to the meanings that the participants use in their economic action, and which is the object of study to the professional economist. There is no strict separation or duality between the observer and the observed, the subject and the object. So economics, like all semiotic disciplines, is the study of imposed order based on meaning rather than natural or physical order. The object of study is the same sort of activity or being that carries out the inquiry. Interpretation, or hermeneutics, is inherent to the study of economy. The superiority of the hermeneutic, interpretive, semiotic approach over the naturalistic Cartesian approach is that it allows for the study of economics to be an objective science, but not strictly physical or material science. The meanings that participants understand, as well as the objective conditions of living, change over time. Therefore, economic science is an evolutionary science, as is the economic order created in speech. So what I talked about today is the first half of this overall talk. Today, we covered these first three items. The next talk would go more deeply into the Cartesian metaphysics and how philosophy made its paradigm shift out of those metaphysics into this new metaphysics that depends on psychology and philosophy of language. It shows Kant's and Hume's mistake and talks about that metaphysical paradigm change. Then I look at how economy is really a process of conversation and semiosis, using money and other economic institutions to get action done. And then the implications for economic theory and policy. So that would be the next time. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. And I guess we can shift it back, John, to gallery view and have a discussion and take questions and answers.